Hello and welcome to the fourth and final webinar in this series from EduFlow. We have over 200 people signed up today, which is amazing. So we're going to wait a couple of minutes while everyone signs in, logs in, whatever you need to do. And so while we're waiting for people to join us, we thought we would run a poll. And given that the subject of today's conversation is coaching, we're going to be asking you a couple of questions around whether you have already started using coaching in your toolkit, in your learning and development toolkit, and maybe what are some of the challenges that prevent you from implementing coaching, or maybe prevent it from being impactful as well. So please do take a couple of minutes to vote on that poll. And if you want to add context, you can use the chat feature to do that and tell us about some of the challenges that you face as well. And Pernille and I will tailor our responses to questions or tailor some of the conversation based on the results that we get. So please do vote if you can. And I think while we're waiting for people to vote and we're just coming up on the hour, maybe we'll start with some introductions. My name is Cassandra Nagy. I am the Director of Learning and Development at a marketing agency, and I've been lucky enough to be the host for this whole series of webinars from collaborative learning platform EduFlow. The theme for the series has been, if this is work, then what does learning look like now? And we've been in conversation with some real luminaries from the worlds of instructional design and people development. We've also got a member of the EduFlow team on the webinar with us today. Behind the EduFlow logo, we've got William Cronier, who I'm sure some of you already know from some of our courses, stuff like that. William's going to be moderating the chat, so please do have a lively discussion in there. And of course, on today's fourth and final event, we have our guest speaker, Pernille Hippe Brun, the founder of global coaching company Session. So over the next 30 minutes or so, Pernille and I are going to be talking about the challenges and opportunities that companies face when running coaching programs. And in particular, I'm interested to dig into actionable and trackable ways we can use coaching to future-proof our teams in the face of a rapidly changing workplace. Now, Pernille has so much expertise to share on the topic of coaching. For the last 2 decades, she's been building education programs in private companies and in educational institutions. She's been a strategic business consultant on 3 continents, and she's also written several books on leadership, including a bestseller, which is the Strengths-Based Leadership Handbook. So Pernille, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So I want to start by asking you a question about the timing of setting up Session. You started it in the first part of 2020, if I'm right. And then that was in the midst of a lot of upheaval in the workplace and in teams. Why did this seem to be like the right time to pursue a coaching business opportunity to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people have asked us, was this deliberate because anybody was forced to work from home anyway? And in fact, we actually started thinking about providing a platform and offering a coaching solution that you could access online prior to the pandemic happening. The reason why it then sparked off or took off really, really well in the spring of 2020, of course, was that people were then ready and they didn't have any other choice than to access great business coaching through the online fora. So that was basically just a really, really lucky coincidence. But I think the need for an online platform is there, no matter whether you have to work from home or not. It's wider and broader than that, because it's about giving access, and by providing an online platform, you give more people the opportunity to access great business coaching. So that's basically what's happening when you build a platform and a pandemic happen at the same time, and then you get the opportunity to really get it going well from the beginning, which was fortunate for us.
Yeah, it does sound like felicitous timing. And I want to ask, given that you talked about access just there and widening access to coaching, does that imply that there historically has been an access problem to coaching as a development tool for people on teams?
Exactly. So great professional business coaching has tended to be very elitist, very, for the few privileged people, maybe at the top executive level, who got it as a perk or who got access to it because they could afford to. So basically what I've seen as a consultant and a business coach traveling the world is that the elitism and the access to really, really great business education and business coaching has been reserved for the few. And I really wanted to change that. I wanted to be part of that movement where we could actually democratize coaching and give more people access to great business education because it's needed. Yes.
Yeah, and actually, I think one comment in the chat is already saying that they offer coaching. One of our participants offers coaching to the executive team. They're thinking about rolling it out to other people. Maybe then we can dig into a little bit on what is problematic about coaching being a perk for leadership teams, and what do we stand to gain by the democratization of coaching?
Yeah, so I think, there's nothing wrong with perks. It's great to offer perks. It's just unfair if it's only reserved for the few, right? So it's about giving access to everyone. So what we're trying to do is actually to see if we can provide a solution that's inexpensive enough so that more people can get access. And the problem with great business coaching has been the price. The price ranges, they are insanely expensive solutions very often, and then reserved for the few because of that. But if we could offer something online where we could actually get access and get the price down by providing, making it easier for coaches to also deliver their great coaching online, then this could keep the price down without compromising on high quality business coaching. And then also it creates kind of like this unfairness in organizations and businesses if you only offer it to one level and not to the others, like they need it more and they don't. Everybody deserves a great coach and could need a great coach. So that's why it's a problem, actually, that you reserve it for the few. It creates this inequality and makes it unfair.
So have you seen instances in which there's a kind of an unspoken grievance in the office around coaching and leaders getting it but no one else?
Exactly. And employees asking, I could also need a coach. I would love to develop the skill. I have problems communicating well with other teams, and this is a highly needed skill for me in my new role. And I really struggle with it. And I need some feedback from an external source who could help me build up another language, another way of communicating. And then, I don't get that access, but I see my top executives do, and my managers do. Are they worth more than me? And things like that coming up, where it all of a sudden creates this inequality, which is really not fair.
That would be hugely problematic, I can imagine. So I was going to ask you which roles should we prioritize for coaching, but maybe I'll zoom out a little bit and say, what kind of skills are in the sweet spot for coaching? What kind of skills should we be looking at solving or increasing with a coaching solution?
Yeah, I think actually both questions are really great questions to ask, because if you look at roles, if you have a limited budget as an HR, L&D, a consultant, you also have to choose, where do you spend your budget? Where do you spend your money? So it's a valid question for HR and L&D to ask, and also to prioritize. And what we've done when we partnered up with businesses and trying to figure out where do you spend your money best, is that we looked at where is it needed the most at the moment. And very often management and managers do come up because they have a huge impact on other people. So individual contributors also have impact on their colleagues. But if you take a manager who is leading a team of maybe 10 people or 20 people, and he needs to develop himself within strategic thinking, within collaboration, emotional intelligence, his listening skills, and he's rated really, really poorly by his team, offering him coaching will have a great impact on the entire team and the organization. The individual contributor can also benefit, and we can move that individual as well. And the skill sets might be the same needed, listening skills, collaboration skills, but the impact might only be on that individual person, not necessarily on a wider team. So we try to look at, when prioritizing budgets, you know, where is it that our investment gives us the most return on investment, actually. And that's not to say that not everybody deserves it. Of course they do, and need it also. But there's this, we need to be also honest about, you know, we have limited budgets. So basically what we've done a lot of times is to offer it to management teams first, and then see if that could have that ripple effect, and maybe even teaching the managers some coaching skills as well, helping their teams learn and grow, and see if we could, by upgrading managers, also upgrade the whole and wider team, and then thus use coaching that way.
That really resonates with me, because when I first started out as working in learning and development, I neglected the managers on the team, and I thought, well, let's go straight to the individual contributor because they're the one actually doing the work. And that does have a great impact. But of course, if managers aren't backing up the skill and helping people practice the skills that you're teaching them, then you have this sort of limited effect. And sometimes it can even be frustrating for the team member if the manager's not behind the change that you're asking them to make. And so I think my big lesson from the beginning of working in learning and development was to build better relationships with managers and support managers better.
Yes, exactly.
Because you have that trickle-down effect.
Exactly. And managers are those that we look at the most, right? So they have a huge impact on the whole atmosphere of the team, and how well the team thrives, and also what's moving people, and what's the message sense that's what skill sets are important. So if you have a manager who really cannot listen, cannot collaborate well, cannot, you know, also be open for new ideas, you know, what message does that send to the team? So that's why it's so important that we have great leadership in organizations of today. It's always been important, but maybe even more important now, because also a lot of what we're doing is still happening online. Even when the pandemic one day, fortunately, hopefully is over, you know, then we'll still need to be online every once in a while. And then those skills of listening and really using your emotional intelligence, tuning into what's happening behind the screen, becomes even more important, perhaps.
And if we think about both managers and individual contributors, do you have a specific preference, or is a specific way we should be choosing between a peer-to-peer coaching program and maybe more of a mentor coaching program? How do you choose between those? Which is more impactful and for whom, I suppose?
Yeah, so I think the peer-to-peer coaching programs, where you really teach colleagues to give each other feedback, is extremely valid. And you know, you can build it into also the mentor and coachee relationship, or the person where you have a more experienced person teaching you how to think about your job and how to organize yourself in that role you are in, and understand the wider organization better. That's one skill set of learning. But what's actually really needed is peer-to-peer coaching, where we learn from one another. It's not necessarily one answer is more right than the other. So I think that peer-to-peer way of building up programs is a really, really valid way of using coaching as a way to create a continuous learning development in the organization. So continuous learning is something, or the learning agility mindset is really, really important nowadays, because we need to constantly relearn what we think we know. We need to be able to ask questions to our current practices and the way we work, and ask, are there better ways? Are there new ways? Are there other ways we could do this that would be more efficient, but also maybe more fun and make us thrive better? So that really ability to question what's going on is so important. And that's what you do with peer-to-peer learning.
So that creating that safe space for some critical thinking and peer
Exactly.
learning goes better with peer-to-peer coaching. That's interesting.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And I think, would you say that coaching is one of the better ways, I think, to learn a new behavior, or to have a new desired behavior modeled to the team as well? Do you think that's one of the strengths of coaching, or is it more powerful when it just helps people reflect on their current behavior?
No, it's actually both. So it's interesting, because we've been running quite a few programs where we try to track progress and measure, the impact of the business coaching. And the reflective side of coaching, by asking a question and listening to yourself answer that question and getting another perspective, that just by speaking with a person who can ask you really, really great questions and broaden your perspective in that sense, is really, really important. And we also see that sometimes coaches need to offer some advice, some guidance, some ideas for why don't you try this out, or try to read this article and try this behavior out. And then people go experiment and learn new skill sets that way and get feedback, maybe from their colleagues in the peer-to-peer program, and come back to the coach, maybe with a video recording showing what they did. They get some more feedback from the coach, or good advice, or sense of direction. Then that also helps people move. So it's not an either or in our experience in session. It's actually both and. But it works on different ways. So basically what you need, if you need a sparring partner who can help you think out of the box and broaden your perspective, then that's what you can get in a certain setting and a certain way of being asked questions. And then there's this other setting where you actually have the ability to move within a skill set where you need to move. And this is where it's easier to track progress, actually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I want to actually speak to tracking progress and the ROI of coaching as well, because I think that's often a bit of pushback that we get when we put coaching into our budget. It's like, well, how are we going to know
Yes.
the impact? And so I want to speak to that. First of all, I want to address a really interesting comment we've got in the chat from Ritu, which says the term should be cross-learning rather than peer-to-peer coaching to avoid ego clashes. Do you have a take on that, Pernille? Like, is there sometimes an ego problem in peer-to-peer coaching, and could we be framing it in a different way to avoid that?
I really like that comment, because it is about taking the ego. That's part of the skill set that we are trying to actually encompass through coaching, because we would like for people to offer a perspective rather than give an advice, perhaps. Or offer, not necessarily a solution, but a question that could spark people's imagination to actually figure out a way of doing it in their own way. So a lot of people have asked, so if you give an advice, is it even coaching? Because coaching is about asking questions, and that's correct. And it's all about timing. So I think this ego question is really, really valid, because if people give advice because they want to sound clever, or get their own opinion through, or you need to do it my way, then it's not really coaching. So yeah, there's definitely something to think about there, if that is something that people experience when they use that other name for it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's really interesting. It can be difficult to find the right pairs with peer coaching, or to not increase some senses of that insecurity within the workplace. I think if you choose the wrong pairings. So it
also depends on the skill sets of the people offering the peer-to-peer coaching, right? So again, we could look at this as room for improvement, or something where we could actually offer more training, that people are not necessarily doing this to boost their egos, but perhaps because they lack some skills, or some questions they could ask, or some frameworks, or some methodologies. And then we could rather than thinking about it as, oh, this person is on a ego trip, he or she is trying to help, and let's help him or her help better, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that depends a lot on the organizational culture as well, whether you have the kind of culture that doesn't allow ego trips, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I want to turn to the thorny question of ROI and getting leadership approval, leadership buy-in for coaching. So how can we prove the ROI of a coaching program? What metrics should we be tracking if we implement any sort of coaching?
Yeah, so one thing we really experienced is either that we would love to offer this, but we don't have buy-in from upper level management or finance, and we can't get the money for it, or that's some of the things that we hear very often. So we've tried to help organizations build in metrics in the coaching program, depending on the metrics already existing in the organization. So looking at, for instance, team performance, then you offer coaching to the leader or the manager, and you measure very closely what kind of focus areas are this leader or manager working on right now. Then you track on a scale from, let's say, 0 to 10, like using the ENPS score, how much would the team and the manager's manager and the peers around that manager say this manager has moved as a result of the coaching program on the individual level. At the same time, you track how much does the ENPS score move in the team, or the sales score, or whatever other metrics you are using to measure improvement in the team. It could be overall performance metrics. It could also be engagement scores, Gallup's Q12, you know, whatever scores you use already. Try to see what's the status when the coaching program starts and what's the status after. And then you have a number actually that you can point at, as well as an individual score for the person who is the recipient of the coaching program. Mm-hmm. And this is just paramount, because if you can't prove it in some way or the other, you know, everybody, when they're asked, were you happy with your coaching program? I mean, I very, very rarely see anybody say no. You know, people are usually, if they have a great coach, of course, sometimes it happens, they don't feel the relationship worked out well, but they are never completely unsatisfied. But it's just not enough. You know, when we speak with finance and upper level management, we need more hardcore metrics to point towards. And that's why it's so, so important that we track it from the beginning of the coaching program.
So thinking on a really sort of tactical level, if you have not yet launched your coaching program, but you know you want to, and yes, you anticipate that you're going to get pushback from leadership, how could do we need to present our reporting strategy to leadership? Do we need to do a temperature test and do those NPS scores before the coaching program and show them to leadership? Anything like that? Like, how can we be making a strong case, right?
Yeah, that would be the strong case to build up, you know, based on our recent ENPS score indicates that these are the skill sets that we need to develop further in our management team or in the team in general. This is the solution. It directly addresses those skills. We have individual coaches for individual contributors or managers, and they can help them move within these skill sets where we see things are lacking. And being very, very mindful of what you have already, of stories, of numbers, of reports, of anything you can point towards where there's something that you would like to improve, and then speak to that. On the one hand, which is very individual based on the organization, you could also point at experiences from other organizations and look at, you know, what has other organizations in a similar situation as us gotten out of implementing a coaching program to address these issues we are experiencing right now. That's also a way of speaking with finance or whomever you need to speak with to get the budget about why this could pay off. And then of course be very open-minded towards, well, let's give it a try. Let's launch a pilot program, for instance. Don't start, you know, with the whole organization at once. If you can't get a budget for that, don't give up. Try to maybe get coaching from one single person, and then prove the case and show the numbers and see whether this can convince, because not trying it out at all won't move the needle. So that's very often where we start. It's by running a pilot program with one team in one part of the organization, and then they can also experience we do invest in it, but the return of investment we get in terms of engagement, maybe even sales numbers, production numbers, you know, anything from engagement scores, and we know how much engagement influences productivity, then you can show those metrics, and then hopefully this will get buy-in for a wider coaching program in your organization.
Wow, I love that idea of a pilot program. That feels much less scary to invest in a one-person pilot program and have a good reporting system set up. One thing I try to do for coaching and other initiatives is try to use 3 different reporting structures. So if we take doing the NPS surveys before and after the approval surveys, thinking about how someone judges their own level of progress before and after coaching, their own skills, and surveying them before and after, and then surveying their team members, their peers, to see whether that person's skills have improved over the session, and then looking at the quantitative outcomes on whatever numbers you're looking at. Production we look at in my work, but it can be sales numbers or whatever. So having that sort of self-reflection, peer reflection, and then the actual numbers before and after. So trying to capture a bit of a quantitative and qualitative picture.
Yeah, where we actually, the 360 methodology, where you get this picture. So it's not only self-evaluation, but you have that wider, broader picture of what others also are thinking about, both where you are today and also the improvement happening is so important, so that it's not only one person speaking for him or herself.
And I think this speaks to perhaps a larger uncertainty in learning and development, which is how to measure behavior change. And Rita's asked another question in the Q&A feature, which is how can we measure behavior change? And I think this anxiety about whether what we're doing is actually making an impact extends beyond coaching and into any behavior change program that we launch. Is this an anxiety that you see people?
Yeah, of course. And it's because, I mean, it's what we usually call soft skills, but I think most people listening in here agree with me that soft skills are hard skills, right? So that they are actually some very valid pointers towards things that move the needle for the organization in general. It's behavior. It all comes down to what do we end up doing in the organizations we are part of. And a way we can actually do that is if you take a skill like listening, it sounds soft, listening skills. Why would that matter? Then you have that conversation about what would be signs of him or her being a better listener. And then you have another conversation, which is, and if this happens, what impact will that have? So that you don't just stop with the listening part, but then you write down together with the coach or with your team, perhaps even, what would be signs of me being a better listener if that's required, and why is this important? So that the person receiving the coaching also really get what is it I'm trying to learn here. So listening is, what is it? And then you get some concrete example. Well, you're trying to actively being able to rephrase what you just heard the other person said. That's a sign of you being a better listener, that you actually listen so you can repeat to me what was being said. Another sign of you being a better listener is the ability for you to actually understand tomorrow when I come back with another problem, that this had to do with what I brought up yesterday. So if you can connect the two dots between my problems, that's another sign of you being a better listener. So you don't have to come up with all the solutions yourself on what is this skill in actual real organizational life, but have the help of your coach, but also your peers, pointing it into some concrete, impactful behaviors that you can actually try out and experiment with. So that's how we do it when we track behavioral change. It's like, okay, you want to be a better listener. These are the behaviors that would be a sign of you being a better listener. Or you would like to collaborate better. What are the signs of you collaborating better? It could be reaching out more, or people even reaching out to you more. How often does that happen today? In the future, how many times do you think that will happen then within the next month, for instance? So they have some very concrete metrics you can actually look at. And did it happen or did it not happen?
Wow, that is really, really useful, because quite often with soft skills, we say, oh yeah, better listener or whatever. And then we all have a different idea of what that might be. And actually we might not have an idea of it, but it's easy to say. And just ask the question, well, what would it be like to be a better listener? What would that behavior on a really granular level look like? That feels so powerful, just to have people visualize that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So apart from, let's say, inverted commas, soft skills, or including these soft skills, what skills do you think we should be teaching people now, coaching people in now, to future-proof them for the next few years in the workplace?
So I already mentioned listening skills, and that's because, you know, we don't know the future. We've never known the future, but I think the change of speed happening nowadays requires even more to be able to actually listen into what is happening around us and what's going on, what trends are there. Strategic thinking is another skill sets, and emotional intelligence. So it's also about being able to look into other people's lives, resonating with where they're coming from, understanding that perspective in a cross-cultural setting, because moving online also gives us the possibility to work with many more cultures and people from different backgrounds than ourselves. That requires a lot of emotional intelligence so that we can actually avoid some of the pitfalls hidden in when very diverse team meets. Right, so it has some pros, but it also poses some challenges when we make teams more diverse, which is also needed. So that ability to work in a multicultural setting requires listening. It requires emotional intelligence. It also requires curiosity, that you're generally looking for opportunities, but also strengths, both in yourself and in others and in the surrounding system. So a strengths-based approach is also something that we believe is really, really important for organizations and for individuals to succeed in the future. If you only look for everything that can go wrong and all the mistakes other people are making, you're not creating an atmosphere where people are thriving and engaged. So you need, as a manager and as a colleague, to be able to look for the strength in others and in yourself, and then build on that rather than just fixing all the mistakes and weaknesses.
I think in one of your previous books, the one on strengths-based leadership, you talked about the power of leaning into those things we're actually good at rather than constantly focusing on the problem. And I think that can be a really interesting way also of thinking about how we apportion coaching resources, which is, can we coach people in the things they're good at rather than necessarily the things maybe they're bad at? You know, maybe the things they're bad at, we should just sort of leave to one side and coach people in their strengths. Do you think that's an approach that we could feasibly take to?
Yes, and it's been proven that you can feasibly take this. So it's not only me saying it, but yeah, it's a really, really valid approach, and it's also so much more fun. You know, so learning should be fun. It shouldn't be something that we try to just pull down on other people and, oh, you need to develop because it's so important for the work of tomorrow. It is, but how can we make it engaging and fun? And one way of doing that is building on people's strengths and help them build on their own strengths and identify them in themselves. So I've spoken already about listening skills, and maybe you have a person who is very impatient and he's not a very good listener, and you want to help him become a better listener. What is he really good at? Maybe he's passionately curious. Then you can speak to that in him and say, oh, how about you use that approach of being passionately curious and try something new instead of asking all these questions all the time and being really, you know, upfront with your curiosity. Can you still be curious, but then be a little bit more silent? And all of a sudden, curiosity has turned into a concrete behavior of listening. So taking people's strengths and building on them when working on the things where they have to improve is a really, really great and fun and engaging and valid way of developing people.
Wow, yeah, I hadn't thought of actually using the strength to solve the problem. That's really potent.
And also, I mean, you can also do this when you convince people for your budget, right? Looking at what strength do you have as an HR consultant, as an LD or department? Are your strengths within numbers? Are they within telling a compelling story? You know, and then take whatever approach you know you do best. And then where you are lacking somebody, go borrow ideas, imagination, inspiration from teams who really are great at this and have them help you build it up, build the case up so that you don't have to do everything yourself. So that's another approach when you think about the strengths-based coaching. It really builds on strength and borrowing strength from others as well, and not being this perfect, well-rounded single individual human being, but having like a well-rounded team. Yeah.
That feels nice as well, that we don't have to solve it all just on our own, and we kind of have permission to
Ask for help.
The strengths as well, and that's a good thing. I want to look at the poll results, if that's okay. We asked, does your organization's current L&D strategy include some form of coaching? 60% of people said no, so we've got a lot of people who maybe haven't tried to get buy-in for coaching, or have struggled to get buy-in, or just starting their journey there. And we asked, which of these challenges prevent you from implementing coaching at your organization? And the most common one, nearly half of people said getting access to the right resources. So I think that's interesting, and I'm interested to hear if anyone who responded wants to drop in the chat what kind of resources they might struggle to get access to, whether it's funds, whether it's good coaches, it's time, something else. Let us know in the chat. Does this resonate with some of the challenges that you've seen in your work, Pernille?
Yes. So, well, resources, like you said, it could be many things that people are actually answering when they're speaking to that. It could be not getting access to high quality business coaches, which is a problem we've seen. And that's also why we've been very diligent to actually vet our coaches and find someone who has experience from business settings and not just life coaching. And nothing wrong with life coaching, but it's really important when you coach in organizations that you have business acumen, that you know the language of businesses and power dynamics and what it means being a manager in the middle of, having your own manager and then having to communicate sometimes something that you maybe don't fully agree with, but partly agree with. And how do you then stay authentic with your team, and all these issues that a business coach need to really, really get on that deeper level. So that's why it's really, really important to find high quality business coaches. Resources could also be, and let's see what comes in the chat if people answer there. What kind of resources were they pointing towards? It could also be getting access to the right people in the organization who can make the decision. Right, and then it's about figuring out the dynamics of that organization. How do I get access to the right person who can actually make the decision with me to implement a coaching program? And again, this is where I don't know the answer to that. It depends on the individual situation, what it's like. But again, asking for help and looking at others who are successfully in getting their budgets approved. What is it they do? Can I learn something from them?
And I think time is one of the big things. David's just put in the chat that time to learn and time with more knowledgeable people. We also had a few people responding on the poll that time was a problem. And I can really, that resonates with me because I work in an agency, and obviously time is literally money. And when you're trying to argue for someone doing some maybe soft skills coaching, instead of being on the front line producing work and supporting the business's unit economics, that can become a bit of a fraught conversation, arguing for time. How have you tried to, with your coaching programs at Session, how do you try to integrate the change into the work? How do people do the change impact?
So that's a really, really great question, because if you don't, then your program is doomed to fail. You need to build in experimentation and practices between sessions where people actually try out concrete behavior in concrete situations. So one thing we do is that we always make sure that before we end a session with an individual client, we talk about, so what are you going to try out before we meet again next time? And it could be, at the next team meeting, I will start the team meeting in a new way. I will start by asking a question and have people speak two and two about that question before I even present them with the agenda. Or it could be that at the next meeting, we start off by just sitting by ourselves for 1 minute, reflecting about, if this meeting is successful, what do we get out of it? Something like that, And then they go try it out and they see the reactions, and they get very concrete advice on, look for people's reactions. Look for what's the effect of you doing something else than you usually did. And then they come back and you have that other reflection, and then you take the next question and talk about what do I need to do between now and next time again. So that's really, really important that you try new behavior out between sessions. Maybe you read an article, maybe you watch a YouTube video, maybe there's something else you do, a webinar, this webinar, something that can help you see new perspectives, learn and grow, and try out new behavior.
So it's all that kind of metacognition of reflecting upon the change as you do it at work, rather than sitting in a course and being removed from work. Okay.
Exactly.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the frameworks and methodologies that coaches use to enhance their impact. And this is a question from Vansal in the Q&A, is what frameworks and methodologies can you give that are used to enhance the effect of a coach?
Of the coach or of the coachee? Yes. So one thing we do, all session coaches are required to, of course, receive continued education and supervision. And one of the things, the methodologies there, is to give people a sense of the whole hour they have with the client. So that time perspective usually is not something people are that trained in before they become professional coaches. They, of course, have that when they have the education they need to have. But the framework of having a start of the session, then there's the middle of the session, and there's the end of the session. Just having that in mind when you run the session, it might sound so simple, but some people forget it. That coaching methodology of starting off in a good way with setting the expectations for the session, following up from last time, just having that structure. And then in the middle, that's where you open up, you ask all your questions, you try out new perspectives, and then you end the session in a way where you can actually concretely make decisions about what behavior should you try out, what should you read, what's happening between now and next session. That very, very simple structure is one thing that we require of all of our coaches to keep in mind when they coach. And then the whole strengths-based methodology, which is basically looking for strengths, enlarging strengths, asking strengths-based questions, asking how strengths can compensate for the weaknesses that people are experiencing. And also that's connected to energy level. So being mindful of how the strengths-based philosophy is based on energy. How can we create energy in our daily lives so that we can have fun going to work, and that it's it's an experience that we cherish rather than dull work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think some people can be really good at something, but yet it doesn't give them energy, and it ends up exhausting them and burning them out. So those two things can decouple sometimes, yes. The energy and the actual skill.
Exactly. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but that's some of the methodologies that people are.
So Bansal says yes in the chat. It says, thank you for answering my question. So they did a good job there, Pernille. David also asks, here's an interesting question, and I think we didn't touch on this in the ROI section, but he says, to what extent does having coaching programs support employee longevity, tenure, and engagement? And he thinks this would be a great value prop for him in asking people to invest in.
Exactly, the retention strategy, right? So how do we make sure that people want to stay and work for us and with us? And investing in people development has proven. There's a lot of research showing this lately, not only lately, but more so lately because of the big retention. And we've seen that people are leaving their jobs at a speed never seen before, especially in the US. And this is something that has to do with the fact that people might not feel that they can get their needs met at the workplace where they are right now. And one thing, when you ask them when they leave, what could have made you stay? One of the answers people give is, what if people invested in my development? That would have made me stay. And even then, if they move on, they can remember that organization and want to endorse that business because they invested in my development. They will be forever thankful, and that will help you attract new employees as well as an organization. So it's a great retention strategy. And definitely also attraction strategy, actually. Yeah.
So Tanu asks us to go back a little bit and say, right, we've spoken a lot about like tracking, improving the ROI, but what about identifying the areas which need to be coached? We haven't spoken about that. How do you identify which things people need coaching?
Areas needs to be coached. Yeah, that's a really great question. One thing we've identified in session is 38 focus areas that all organizations have told us they need help with. So you could get an inspiration from that, looking merely at that list. But what I would encourage even more is that you sit down, you look at the problem you're having, and then you look at what is it you would like to get, instead of just looking at, oh, we are having this problem, for instance, people leaving our teams, they're very low engagement, low performance, people are not thriving. That's the problem. Then you look at what would you like to get? Well, it's a flourishing team, an engaged team, a situation where people attract customers because the way the tone of their voice when they speak with customers and the product they deliver is just of such high quality. If you have that end of state in your mind, you can better then identify what skill sets would that require. So I would encourage everyone to look at what is it you would like to accomplish with your team, your organization, or with that individual. What's the end goal, in terms of behavior, in terms of what he or she does when she's performing and thriving to her or his best ability. And then when that's identified, you can point at what would that look like? What kind of skill sets would that require?
And there we go back to that. What would that look like? So really asking people to visualize this change, which I think is so powerful.
Yeah, and that's why we spend quite a bit of time with HR and L&D teams to actually identify that future stage. What is it we are aiming for? What is it we're trying to accomplish? And then we identify the skill sets.
I love that. That really sort of holds us to account on what we're actually trying to achieve, rather than just saying, coaching, everyone's doing it. Let's do it.
And one last thing is also then try to see if you can make that fit with the values in the company. So, or behavioral principles. It might be you have a code of conduct, or you have a set of competences that you're already trying to make people live by. And how can the coaching program supplement that, rather than figuring something completely new out, right? Maybe you have the answer already there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's feels a bit more top down, but a different approach of like, these are the values we expect people to have, and we're going to coach you up to them rather than identifying the holes. That's also an interesting approach. I want to look at this question that David's dropped in the Q&A, because I think it's a problem that I've had at work. And he says, following up on the strengths-based idea, how do you understand employees' strengths? How do you keep an inventory of strengths to ensure building on them? And this is something we struggled with at work. Like, how do we track people's expertise and level of expertise and things? Should you be tracking that, or should you just ask people to come with their strengths?
So, well, should is a word that's highly valued in many organizations, but it's also a word where we should look at why should they? Right. So it's about impact again. If we should track it, it's because we can then prove that we move the needle within that area, including the strengths. So very often when we coach people, we look at, how much did you develop from A to B within an area where you were weak? But what we encourage to do is also to look at, if the skill sets are here and you want people to this is the end state, the end goal you have in mind, and these are the skill sets you need to train, where are the outliers in the company that are really, really great at this already? And then you write that down and you track that progress as well. So you don't only track, weaknesses becoming less weaknesses, but you also track how people who are already good within an area move the needle by becoming extremely strong within some areas. And therefore, I think tracking strengths is just as important and vital as tracking progress within skill sets where people were weak from the beginning. And should you? Well, again, it's a good idea if it proves the impact of the program. So that's why, but it also brings energy to the team when you track progress within strengths and you speak about strengths. So you have those sheets where people can see, oh, my strengths are within this area, then you can borrow your strengths to other teams, or they can figure out, oh, there's a person over there in that team who has this skill set or this competences or this strength. And I would like to learn how to become more skilled within this area. So I better go to that person who has that strength and learn from him or her. And how to identify strength, that's it's about energy. So it's those situations where you're full of energy and where you also get feedback from others that you are good at it. So it's not enough that you yourself say, well, I'm an extremely curious person, so one of my skill sets and strengths are curiosity. Well, what if other people feel that you're judging them all the time and you're not curious, you're more judgmental than curious? So you need the feedback. So strengths are also dependent on other people's opinions about you, but it's only you who can determine whether this activity where you feel strong is an activity that gives you energy. And that's one of the things that's a requirement for it to be a strength.
Wow, I did not know that. I would have thought, as one of the questions in the chat that we have, I would have thought it was an either or, like either you identify your skills or someone else does. But actually having both perspectives is, of course, much stronger, and could be quite surprising for people, I suppose, if you've always thought you're a great leader or whatever, and you get some non
yes
on that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And you can also take a test, of course. There are tons of great strengths tests out there that you can take, and then you can have a discussion about them afterwards and see the Gallup Strength Finder. We have TT38. There are tons of great. The VIA Strength Finder test is also one that you can work with your team, and then you have some words that, you know, sometimes it can be hard to put words to your strengths, but these are great tools, all of them.
Yeah, I would love it if people share some strengths tests. Well, that's hard to say. Strengths tests in the chat so we can check them out and find out what our strengths are. I want to finish up in a couple of minutes because we're coming up onto the hour, and David's asked a really interesting question that I think will focus us quite a lot for the last question, which is, in what conditions or situations would you definitely not set up a coaching program?
Oh, great. Oh, I'm glad that question came up, because there's actually one thing we didn't talk about, and that's, could everybody be coached? Is everybody coachable? And it does require a willingness to learn, a curiosity, a willingness to receive feedback. And of course, in the beginning, if you're experiencing an individual who has resistance, that's where the great coach can actually work with that person and look into this resistance together with the person. Maybe it's because the person feels that this was something that was put on me, you know, I didn't choose it. It's someone else told me I need a coach, but I don't need a coach. I don't want a coach, you know. So you need to have that honest conversation about why would coaching be a good idea for you in each instance. I wouldn't implement a coaching program with managers if I did not also talk with them about the other roles they're having. So coaching programs internally, when you offer them internally in organizations for managers, which a lot of organizations do, and I love those where it actually plays out in a way where the managers becomes coaches in some instances, but not all. So in some instances, the manager can act as a coach. For instance, when they brainstorm with the employee, when the employee is about to figure out a new way of doing a certain task on his own, and the manager helps him or her find the way, and they don't necessarily have the answer to it. That's a genuine way of using a coaching skills as a manager. But if the manager is in there to give feedback, there's this power relationship you need to be aware of when you have managers as a coach. So you just need to be very, very mindful of teaching the managers to use it in a way where they don't misuse it in situations where it's not coaching that's required, but feedback, or, you know, appraisal sessions or reappraisal sessions. So having that very good ability to as a manager communicate, when am I using coaching skills and when am I doing something else. That's really, really important. And if you don't can't do that, then don't implement a coaching program, because then it's going to fail and get a bad reputation and everything, you know, so.
Wow, I hadn't thought about the sort of hygiene you have to do before you implement that coaching program. So when you talk about the other roles manager has, I think I understand that what you're saying is coaching is not right for every situation. We have to be situational managers, in which sometimes it is constructive feedback, or sometimes it is a disciplinary conversation or something like that. So just because we have coaching as a tool, it's not always the right tool to use. Is that
No, exactly. It's extremely important to use it wisely and be mindful of the power dynamics that's always there between the manager and an employee, no matter if you like it or not, it's there. So, and also I was thinking the role of coaching and when is it a good idea and when is it not a good idea. So basically, if you have to convey a message for everybody, it's a great idea to just send people on a course, and they are taught general skills. That plays out well. But if you want to move the individual, that's when coaching is most efficient. So also figuring out what is it we are trying to accomplish here, and what's the best tool for that. And it's not always coaching. Sometimes a course is better. Sometimes it's better to communicate something widely in an online call, and you don't need to coach the person to get the message. You can just tell it. So basically figuring out, what's the situation and what's the best tool then, not always coaching, but behavioral change coaching for sure.
Interesting. Okay. And if anyone's interested more in behavior change, we did our first webinar in this series was with Julie Dirksen, talking about behavior change, and modeling was one of those things, which I think one of the things that Julie spoke about, which links back into that coaching.
Yes.
Well, we're coming up on the hour. It's flown past. Pernille, thank you so much. It was absolutely wonderful to talk to you, and thanks to everyone else for being such a vibrant audience. We had so many questions and comments. Pernille, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'd like to say thank
Likewise.
you from the whole EduFlow team.
Likewise. Thank you so much for inviting me.